whoop. That's really the best way I can describe this.
Six Flags America does not fit the Six Flags Entertainment Corporation's long-term growth plans.
They're closing it, man.
On November 2nd, Six Flags is closing the park for good, hoping to sell the 500 acres the park sits on.
They will be
redeveloping the property at the end of the 2025 season.
This is mind-blowing news.
Six Flags Cedar Fair combined, and Cedar Fair said we got to pay off billions and billions of our combined debt, so we're going to sell the park for real estate money.
After 43 years, this park will be no more.
The best Six Flags park in the state of Maryland, at least for now. While it exists.
I'm just gonna go to Six Flags America without you, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
This
All right.
car will self-destruct in 3, 2, 1.
Did Six Flags America deserve its fate? The cullings of the post-merger Six Flags Corporation have been merciless. Numerous beloved attractions have met their unceremonious end, ranging from beloved classics to the world's tallest roller coaster. These actions have sent the roller coaster community into an absolute panic, worrying endlessly about what will be eliminated next. But the scores of sudden ride removals would pale in comparison to Zimmerman's greatest victim. With the strike of a pen, the Six Flags Corporation wiped an entire park off the map. And now, Six Flags America has reached its day of reckoning. Six Flags America was one of the troubled Six Flags chain's many neglected stepchildren, perhaps its most neglected one. A late addition that briefly feasted on the follies of its financially irresponsible father in the 2000s before being left to starve for decades, the park was not in a good place in the years after the bankruptcy. But despite over 2 decades of rot, the early 2020s provided the slightest indication that things were starting to turn around. The long-suffering park was treated to a string of new investments, revitalizing old favorites and culminating in a new, well-themed land. Yet, the closing moments of Richard Zimmerman's reign of terror had SFA squarely in the crosshairs, and there was no hesitation when the time came to pull the trigger. In light of this truly seismic closure, one naturally begins to wonder if such a fate was deserved. Many say that it is. The park has been on life support for the past 2 decades, regularly passed over for new investments and strung along with a slew of hand-me-downs. It's consistently been one of the worst performing parks in the portfolio, and forums have filled to saturation with angry anecdotes from disgruntled enthusiasts traveling across the country to say their final goodbyes and finding 3 of the major coasters down again. They have a point, I won't deny it. But despite all that, I'm here to argue that Six Flags America was a park worth saving. Even with its struggles, it remained a uniquely charming park, a bizarre mishmash of rides and themes that exuded an utterly inimitable charm. And beneath the fading paint and ride closed signs, SFA had one of the most underrated coaster lineups in the country. The spur of investment in the early 2000s and the lack of investment in the years following turned its attraction lineup into a living time capsule. A trip back to the glory days of Six Flags when money seemed fake and no idea was a bad idea. How can we stand to lose this quirky, unpolished but brightly shining jewel in the Six Flags chain? I mean, don't look at me, it's not like I can do anything about it. Ancient Greek legends spoke of a man named Sisyphus, who defied the gods by literally cheating death. Sentenced by Zeus to rot in the underworld, Sisyphus used his wit to trap death in chains and grant his fellow humans eternal life. This act of defiance and subterfuge angered the gods, specifically the god of war Ares, who freed death and captured Sisyphus to inflict upon him eternal damnation. The punishment for Sisyphus' hubris was severe. He would spend the rest of eternity rolling a large boulder up a steep hill. As soon as he would get close to the peak, the boulder would roll away from Sisyphus and he would be forced to start again. And this is how he would spend the rest of his days, pushing forward in futile defiance before failing and starting again. In the past 50 years, Six Flags America has experienced a truly Sisyphean journey. From its mid-70s origins as an ambitious drive-through safari bankrolled by Ross Perot. Is that right? The park would wear many different faces and take on many different names from many different owners. Each time it seemed like things were on the up, the park would inevitably fall into closure or bankruptcy. The mid-90s purchase of the venue by Premier Parks heralded the most significant push towards the highest echelons of the amusement industry, but this brief period of prosperity merely preceded a long, hard decline throughout the 2010s and 2020s that would land the park at the very bottom rung of the Six Flags chain. Just when all seemed lost, though, the man at the bottom of the mountain began one last earnest push. The 2020s saw the most significant investments in the park since the pre-bankruptcy era. New trains, new themed lands, the stray animal once tossed onto the street and left to fend for itself had finally been taken back to the vet and given its shots. And then, Six Flags decided to put it down. The boulder slipped from the park's hands one more time, tumbling into the void from whence it would never return. Six Flags America would be no more. What? Now surely this wasn't the original plan when the Six Flags chain dropped millions of dollars on new trains for Superman and a whole new land, right? Why now? Get to the comments quickly and answer that question before I do it for you. If we want to determine whether or not Six Flags America's closing was the right choice, we need to figure out why the chain would make the choice in the first place. Why would the Six Flags Corporation make multiple significant investments in Six Flags America before quickly throwing the park to the wolves? Why would the chain offer a last gasp of false hope before burying those hopes under the crushing weight of poorly built luxury apartments? Let's get into it. We will start with the financial ramifications of the sale. I could lie here and say that I spent hours slaving away on ProQuest and digging into quarterly reports, but it doesn't take long to realize that the business case for Six Flags America's survival wasn't very strong, especially in the wake of the merger. Poor staffing and decades of neglect have led to woeful attendance numbers. The park hasn't received a ground-up coaster in over 20 years, and entire sections of the park have been left abandoned in place. Six Flags' treatment of their DC destination is the very definition of apathy, and it would take a lot of love to coax this park into profitability. So let's just tally up the recent investments. Okay, we got a fresh coat of paint and floorless trains in the OG B&M dumpster fire, 2 vest trains for their craptastic SLC, 5 feet of new track on Roar, and brand spanking new trains on Superman, which I did actually really appreciate. While the genuinely impressive retheming work in Steamtown and the Superman updates were definite steps in the right direction, there were still multiple attractions in disrepair and whole full areas needing a complete rebuild. Suffice to say that much more money was needed before anyone would consider Six Flags America a destination park. Anyone besides me, at least. Six Flags isn't exactly flush with cash. In the suffocating arms of the Cedar Flags megacorporation, supposedly barely keeping its head above water while swimming in oceans of debt, SFA's existence makes even less sense. In the past, you can argue that Six Flags America was decent competition for the nearby Cedar Fair Park Kings Dominion, located about an hour and a half down the road. Maybe vests on an SLC could be enough to pip some customers from the crosstown competition. If you really wanted to stretch it, you can argue that Six Flags America was geographically poised to compete with Hershey and Busch Gardens Williamsburg, the next closest amusement destinations. But boy, there's a bit of a jump in quality there, isn't there? And now that King's Dominion is sheltered under the same corporate umbrella, SFA is utterly pointless. It makes all the sense in the world to dump the chain's limited resources into King's Dominion, which already has a deep ride lineup with an elite Woody, an RMC, a Giga, and a new impressively themed area with a brand new launched wing coaster, than spend millions trying to prop up the walking corpse of a park that is Six Flags America. It was probably too late to rescind the investments already made into the park before the merger went through, but as soon as the ink from those signatures dried, it was game over. SFA was already at the bottom of the hill, it wasn't worth trying to push it up anymore. So it would take a whole lot of dough to build up the park to a point where it'd be a consistent moneymaker. But the rub lied not just in the profit margins of day-to-day operation, but the value of the land itself. In the wake of the merger, Six Flags had to contend with the combined debt of 2 massive amusement park chains, and suddenly the significant capital the park's sale would bring in became a lot more attractive. Six Flags had already reached out to real estate consulting firm CBRE to negotiate the sale of Six Flags America. While there has been a bit of a fight with the local government, the chain's intention to sell off the land and redevelop the property has not once wavered. And take it from the mouth of Zimmy himself.
After reviewing a number of options, we believe that marketing the property for redevelopment will generate the highest value in return on investment. We anticipate strong interest in the property and will continue to strategically pursue portfolio optimization opportunities as we work to unlock the full value of our portfolio.
God, there's so much corporate doublespeak in there, it makes me want to puke. I then looked into what CBRE does. Their website is stuffed with enough corporate fluff that I could insulate a house with it, but Wikipedia thankfully informs us that CBRE is the world's largest commercial real estate services and investment firm, which focuses on sales and transfers of large swaths of property. Basically, their expertise lines with Zimmerman's attention to redevelop the land. It'll be sold to a corporation and not to private developers. I'm not surprised, just disappointed. Now for the hard part, I'm going to put my own hurt feelings aside for a moment and run through why redeveloping the land instead of selling the park makes sense. Firstly, we must abide by the cardinal rule of real estate: location, location, location. The land occupied by Six Flags America sits a mere half hour from our nation's capital and less than an hour from Baltimore. It's therefore a great location for commuters to both cities to potentially settle. The town of Bowie, where the park resides, is decently wealthy too, with a median household income of $142,000. This is more than twice the national average and 140% higher than the median household income for Maryland. And basically, this land is worth a decent chunk of change. And driving around the area, it's impossible to not notice that there is plenty of precedent for ZimJob's idea to redevelop. Cookie-cutter condos and housing developments are springing up from the earth like boils on a leper. Superman seems predestined to transform into a block of row homes. And secondly, the data implicitly proves that the park isn't making the chain any money, in fact, probably losing the chain money. I couldn't find super recent numbers, but based on previous reports, SFA is one of the worst performing parks in the chain. In 2019, it made up just 4% of total attendance chain-wide, barely clearing such heavy hitters as La Ronde, Darien Lake, and Frontier City. Now, it's important to note here that Six Flags does not actually own any of the bottom three parks I just mentioned, they only operate it, meaning that Six Flags America is the true lame duck in the Six Flags portfolio. Now compare SFA's numbers to the marquee parks. Magic Mountain, Great Adventure, and Great America by themselves all accounted for more than 10% of chain-wide attendance. So yeah, not great for our Bowie brother, that's a whole lot less money coming in. If we then consider that operating costs for an amusement park are largely static, ride running costs, maintenance, staffing, security, and more don't really go down if nobody shows up at the park, I'm comfortable insinuating that SFA was on the wrong side of the profit sheet. The fact that Zimmerman explicitly labeled the sale a financial decision all but confirms this assertion. I don't think that the other competing amusement park chains would be interested in paying top dollar for a park that would immediately start to lose them money. So, redevelopment is the smart solution. Therefore, the logical through line that points to SFA's demise is strong, and I'm sure you all will generally agree. SFA is a financial failure, and the land it rests on is worth far more than the park ever would be. But for a moment, why don't we consider the possibility that this mortal wound was self-inflicted? Six Flags America was in a prime location to attract guests, sandwiched between the 3 million strong Baltimore metro area and the 6 million plus DC metro area. It was easy to get to from local highways, and the entrance was just 10 minutes away from a DC metro station, right by the latest subway expansion that just opened in 2022. The Washington Redskin Potatoes were only 10 minutes down the street at shitty old Northwest Stadium. God damn it, do I have to talk about Dan Snyder again? And while there were competing parks somewhat nearby, those living up by Baltimore would need to drive way more than 2 hours to get to either King's Dominion or Six Flags Great Adventure. There was a strong local base to draw from, so why would such a place be left to rot? We need to figure out how this death spiral began in the first place. Let's head back in time. After learning about the history of Six Flags America, the Greek tragedy of the last half-decade is far from surprising. In fact, this most recent closure announcement is only the latest in a long line of closures that this poor park has suffered. Six Flags America, formerly Adventure World, formerly Wild World, formerly ABC's Wildlife Preserve, has really been through the ringer. And you might just be surprised to learn how many times this park has changed hands. So let's get into it then. Six Flags America was founded in 1974, not as an amusement park, but as a wildlife preserve in Bowie and Largo, Maryland. The ambitious drive-through safari was spearheaded by two Irish immigrants named Frank and William Stevenson, who financed their little pipe dream through funding from the American maverick Ross Perot. And that still gives me a hearty chuckle. If you want some more info on America's third-party loose cannon, go watch John Boyce's documentary on the Reform Party. It is very much worth your time. This drive-through experience would offer up-close and personal animal interactions throughout its 2.5-mile loop, which snaked through 3 different corners of the globe: the North American, South American, and African preserves. Within the bounds of the zoo, patrons will witness anything from rhinos, bison, zebras, giraffes, and ostriches, all for the low price of $3.75. Perot, however, wasn't willing to supply all the funding the Stevenson brothers required, so the cable channel ABC hopped in on the fun in 1973. This partnership provided enough dough to successfully launch the creatively named ABC's Wildlife Preserve in July of 1974. Attendance projections for this ambitious safari experience were high, with ABC expecting as many as 850,000 visitors in the first year. Unfortunately for the prospects of the Reform Party, though, the Wildlife Preserve did not come close to ABC's lofty projections. The true numbers were way lower. The preserve immediately began to hemorrhage money. In fact, the firm took a $4 million bath in the preserve in 1975. ABC thus decided to prop up the struggling safari by introducing an amusement park. No, this isn't actually how Six Flags America as we know it today got its start. Despite the submission of the amusement park plan, the Wildlife Preserve was doing so poorly that ABC decided to renege on the project altogether. Instead of investing even more capital into this sinking ship, ABC cut its losses and closed the park entirely. The preserve would then sit idle for the next 5 years. There were attempts to shop the park around in the late 70s, but they went nowhere. For example, Marriott, soon to burst onto the amusement scene with their Great America parks in Chicago and Northern California, expressed no interest in the Largo location. ABC would thus carry this albatross around their neck for years, until they finally found a buyer in 1978, the host of the legendary Wild Kingdom, Jim Fowler. Oh, remember Wild Kingdom? Those were more innocent times. Fowler tried his darndest to get the park back open, but he was unable to raise the necessary capital. The park thus remained closed throughout all of 1979 and 1980. Fowler would call uncle in July of that year, passing the perpetually problematic plot to a consortium of investors. With $11 million in fresh funds, though, the park would finally roar back to life in 1982 as Wild World.
Looks like you're ready for a good time. You bet. I can see it now. Basking in the sun, cooling in the water, riding on the waves. Checking out the scenery? Yeah.
Ooh, that aged well, didn't it?
Hey, you better get going. The beach is 3 hours away. The beach? Who wants to spend the day on the bridge? I'm at Wild World. It's just around the corner, so now I have more time for fun. What about the new Rafters run? It's awesome water fun for 2.
See The Gong Show live this Saturday at Wild World.
All of this fresh capital preluded a remarkable rebirth when the park finally reopened its doors in 1982. Wild World leaped back into the public eye with a pared-back safari, 3 flats, some water rides, and a carousel. I mean, hey, it's something. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt history class for a minute, but you all need to hear the insanity of the source that I used for this part. This is an article about Wild World from its opening year, and it is absolutely nuts. Wild World, the $11 million, 280-acre playground that opens Saturday in Largo, may be the latest generation in American amusement parks. For one thing, it costs $9.50 per person to get in, and you are supposed to bring or wear your bathing suit. But there is only one way to judge, and that is for the human generations to get in a car and ride out there along the summer roads. For information like that, you rely on your father, alleged veteran of many a centrifugal force, relentless scourer of Ferris wheels, buff and duffer of long-gone thrills. Olympic Park in Irvington, New Jersey was the only pre-Columbian amusement park in the New World. Even waiting in line for its roller coaster was terrifying. Please eat an inadvisedly large brownie and read this article if you're ever bored and feel like losing your grip on reality. Okay, one more excerpt. Palisades Amusement Park had one of the biggest swimming pools in the world, and the only swimming pool in the world that had its own wave-making apparatus. A movable bulkhead made miniature surf. It traversed the immersed millions. It broke upon its own amusement beach. The pool was always full of kids, but one was not allowed in it. Polio. What? For the first time in years, though, the lame duck of Largo would actually attract paying customers. 1983, the first full season of Wild World, started off strong with the addition of new flats and a larger water park. The water park, Wild Waves, quickly became the main attraction for the fledgling amusement destination, especially with its brand new state-of-the-art $2 million wave pool. That is, until the wave pool promptly ended the life of a 9-year-old. Not good. In the wake of this tragedy, the park unsurprisingly began to struggle in the money department, which resulted in the mid-year closure of the drive-thru safari and its replacement with a train tour. By the end of the 1983 season, the safari would be closed altogether, and Wild World would be a water park in all but name. The powers that be, however, had a plan to reverse the park's worsening fortunes. They were going to put Wild World back on the map by building a roller coaster. A big one. Only one problem, though: the park couldn't afford to build such an attraction. Well, Wild World found their solution through some inspiration from their upstate neighbors. A little funfair park known as Knoebels in Pennsylvania just had the bright idea to secure their own headlining attraction by taking an old Woody, the Rocket at San Antonio's recently closed Playland Park, and rebuilding it on their own property. With this strategy, the historic Rocket would be reborn as the Phoenix, and Knoebels would cop an impressive Herb Schmeck Woody for a mere $1.5 million. We all know how that turned out. The cash-strapped Wild World thus followed suit and started scrounging the used car lots for an appropriate headliner. Opportunity fell into their lap when Massachusetts' classic seaside Paragon Park closed, leaving their landmark coaster, 1917's aptly named Giant Coaster, without a home. Wild World officials leaped on the opportunity and bought the Giant Coaster at auction for the ripe sum of $28,000. This was the birth of Six Flags America as we know it. This was the Wild One.
It's the Wild One, stud.
I can beat this coaster.
But it's the wildest.
Wild World, make my day. One's tough like stud. You ride it.
Wild World, just off the Capitol Beltway.
Not only did Wild World save an incredibly historic coaster with the Wild One, they actually improved the ride experience. The coaster was ravaged by a fire in 1963 that destroyed the final helix along with the station and part of the lift hill. Unable to afford the full repair, Paragon Park skipped the helix entirely and went straight into the brakes. Well, Wild World commissioned Charles Dinn to restore the original helix during its reconstruction. With Wild World's investment and the best efforts of our vaunted Dinn Corporation, the tag team restored this piece of history to its former glory. The Washington Post was on the scene to document the historic opening of Wild World's new old coaster.
Two types of riders boarded the Wild One yesterday as the stately old roller coaster began its second life at the Wild World amusement park. The novices hung back a little, but veterans came from as far away as Niagara Falls, Indianapolis, and Manhattan Beach, California. They eagerly climbed into the front and back cars for optimum speed and bounce. They coolly snapped photographs as they zipped and banked and plummeted around the track. What's more, they were overheard making gleeful statements such as, "The kind of ride I like is brutal," made by Jack Lovinger, 37 of Elizabethtown, PA, one of 300 members of the American Coaster Enthusiasts who participated in Wild One's Largo debut on the opening day of the summer season. "This one has a good first drop," he said with satisfaction. "Throws you right out of your seat."
God, Ace members are beyond stereotype, aren't they? The more things change, the more they stay the same. I have no doubt that these 30-year-old nerds with their Jeffrey Dahmer glasses were the very men that grew up to be the gatekeeping boomers that make up the American coaster enthusiasts today. But no matter the clientele, the reviews from the fastidious Acers were good.
"This is the best coaster within 300 or 400 miles. It's as good as the Coney Island Cyclone. It has to do with the element of design, the way everything is put together."
Yes, the Wild One accomplished what its buyers sought to do. Overnight, Wild World metamorphosed from a dying novelty safari with some crappy flats to a bona fide coaster enthusiast destination. Things were only going up from here. But in reality, the park nearly went bankrupt and barely stayed afloat throughout the rest of the 80s. With each passing year, financial woes continued to take their toll. An increasingly tight budget led to continued ride closures and amenity cutbacks. The financial situation was so dire by the end of the 80s and early 90s that in 1991, the Wild One, their headlining attraction, didn't even open. Oof. Are we even surprised at this point, though? Like, par for the course for this cursed park. Wild One in 1991 was a shell of its former glory, and glory is a very generous word to use, with only 9 flat rides open and its marquee attractions sitting idle. Deeply in debt, the consortium's hand was forced, and they had to sell the park at the end of the 1991 operating season. Wild World thus changed hands again. Premier Parks won the bid and took over the reins in 1992. The Oklahoma City-based amusement park operator had entered the space in 1982 after acquiring Frontier City, and they were looking to add a second park to their portfolio. With a decade of amusement experience and much deeper pockets than the previous owners, the future of Wild World seemed to look bright. Immediately, Premier began to invest in the property, and their guiding hand would shape the park into the Six Flags America we knew and loved. Their first big investment was just another hand-me-down, one of Great Adventure's lightning loops named the Python, but a brand new splash boat named Shipwreck Falls opened up soon after. 1995 really shook things up, pun slightly intended, when the park purchased America's first Vekoma SLC, the Mind Eraser, which supposedly was originally going to be called the Hangman? Much better name. Under Premier Parks, Wild World continued to grow, changing names to Adventure World and cruising through the 90s with an octogenarian Woody and a Vekoma SLC as their headlining attractions. And that may not sound very impressive, but the additions to the park were pretty well received. The number of attractions at Wild World literally doubled in the span of 3 years. Inside Track magazine labeled the newly christened Adventure World the most improved theme park in 1992, and 1993, and 1994. The gravy train wasn't stopping either, as the park got Voodoo Drop in 1996 and a weird hybrid log flume kinda coaster-esque thingy known as Skull Mountain right after. If you were ever wondering what the hell that weird log flume drop thingy was doing in the middle of Wild One, well, now you have your answer. Things were really looking up under Premier. In fact, the only loss of the 90s was Python, which was put into storage at the end of 1998, and thus ended the journey for one half of Great Adventure's most storied attractions. And the second one went to Frontier City, Premier's other park. Oh shit, I'm going on a tangent. Those with some knowledge of amusement park history probably know what happens next. 1998 was the year the Premier Parks bought the Six Flags chain and subsumed itself within. Their Largo holding would operate as Adventure World for one more year before being christened Six Flags America in 1999. And the Six Flags Corporation would continue the aggressive investment that the park saw under Premier ownership. I mean, it makes sense, it was basically the same company. Roar, the world's second GCI, was added immediately after the Six Flags purchase and opened in 1999. An inverted boomerang followed soon after, gracing the new DC-themed Gotham City sector with Two-Face, the flip side. 1999 also introduced Python's replacement, the premier outdoor launch coaster Joker's Jinx. But while these rapid-fire additions were undoubtedly significant, they would all be dwarfed, quite literally, by what was to come at the dawn of the new millennium. In 2000, Six Flags unveiled their biggest investment yet, with the massive Intamin Hyper Superman Ride of Steel.
Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Now, Superman soars.
Oh my god, is that Viper? Hi, Viper, I miss you. Also, why the hell did they use you for a Superman ad?
Superman, Ride of Steel. One of the tallest and fastest coasters in the world. Over 20 stories high, more than a mile long. A searing 10 seconds of weightlessness. Now at Six Flags Darien Lake.
Buy one admission, get one free when you bring in a Pepsi can this weekend.
Also, I know this ad is for the Darien Lake version, but I couldn't find one for the Six Flags America version, so oh well. Now, it was a mirror-image clone of the Superman that opened the year prior at Darien Lake, and SFA's newish sister park, Six Flags New England, would get a far superior Intamin Hyper the same year. But despite the slightly cost-cutty nature of Six Flags' three-coaster deal with Intamin, the SFA installation of Superman Ride of Steel was a literally huge investment. A 205-foot drop over a mile of track, more than a minute of prime ride time. Superman was more than just a ride, it was a statement that Six Flags was gonna get that damn boulder to the top of the hill. Or maybe, with the benefit of hindsight, it was the rash decision of a crippling gambling addict in the midst of a coked-up spending spree. Who's to say? Superman Ride of Steel was very well received and became the park's headlining attraction in 2000, but the tweaked-up Six Flags would bestow one more gift on the former Wild World in 2001, the second ever Vekoma Flying Dutchman, Batwing.
For centuries, man has longed to fly. Only now, only here, take flight over Gotham City. Batwing. Lie face down and fly. The earth racing below. Fly. Batwing. Take flight now at Six Flags America.
Save over $17 with discount tickets at your local AAA office.
This groundbreaking flying coaster was a technological tour de force, a showcase of amusement innovation, and an incredibly thrilling attraction. Finally, the eternally struggling Wild World had achieved what it had strived to accomplish for decades. It could be genuinely called a destination park for thrill seekers everywhere. Would you believe me if I told you that things were about to go south really quickly? One could maybe argue that Batwing's purchase is where the cracks begin to form. And it's not just because the ride ended up being an expensive maintenance nightmare. I mean, it was partly because of that, but not for the reason you think. The story behind Batwing's purchase is a pretty fun one. As you may be aware, the competing Paramount Parks chain was actually the first to unveil the Flying Dutchman model, having purchased the exclusive rights to the model and unveiling Stealth at California's Great America in 2000. But it seemed that Vekoma's ambitious flying machine had flown a little too close to the sun. Expecting triumph, Paramount was instead met with an unreliable disaster of a coaster that would only last at the park for 3 years. The prototype was such a lemon that Paramount broke their 3-coaster contract with Vekoma and refused to purchase the 2 remaining installations. The Flying Dutchman was just a little bit too ahead of its time, and with the expected capital from the other 2 Dutchman sales nowhere to be found, Vekoma was forced to declare bankruptcy at the end of the year. This broken contract, however, left the other 2 Flying Dutchmen without a buyer, but Vekoma had already sunk significant capital in the other 2 planned installations. Figuring that some money was better than no money, the restructured Vekoma entered a deal with Six Flags to buy the problematic coasters for pennies on the dollar. This was a huge win for Six Flags, as not only were they able to nab 2 cutting-edge flying coasters for comparatively little cash, but the hard reputation of Stealth allowed them to completely withhold payment until Batwing was installed and fully operational. Absolutely brilliant negotiation, but Batwing's purchase positively reeked of opportunity. With the benefit of hindsight, of course this was a bad idea. Batwing would prove to be almost as problematic as his derided older brother, but this was coked out pre-bankruptcy Six Flags we're talking about. Nothing seemed to be able to sate Six Flags' crippling spending addiction, despite the chain's ever-tightening coffers. And there were no signs of slowing down. I mean, Six Flags America purposely left a large plot of land empty between Superman and Batwing, perfect for the park's next groundbreaking attraction. God, I wonder what incredible ride Premiere placed on that plot of land. It's still an empty lot, isn't it? After Batwing, the new coasters completely stopped as the gravy train finally began to slow down. But the party wasn't entirely over. SFA would get plenty more. 2002 saw the addition of some new flat rides. A Hopkins River Rapids known as Renegade Rapids came in 2003. Then a slew of investments were introduced into the water park in 2005, which were significant enough to result in a name change from Paradise Island to Hurricane Harbor. Honestly, given the glut of new coasters in the early 2000s, a few year-long break to round out the rest of the park's lineup seems entirely reasonable. But a new era of coaster investments would never come. 2007 led to the loss of the park's inverted boomerang Two-Face, which I think was going to be replaced with the recently closed Astroworld's Togo Ultra Twister. However, the Ultra Twister merely sat in the back of the park for a few years before finally being sent to the scrap heap. 2010 would finally bring some good news, though, as the park introduced their biggest expansion in over a decade with Thomastown, an entirely new kiddieland filled with brand new family rides. But oh, what's that noise? Oh no, is that the 2008 recession? Ooh. Once the financial crisis and the Six Flags bankruptcy reared its ugly head, the flurry of expansion that defined Six Flags America and many other Six Flags parks in the 2000s came to a rapid end. The boulder had slipped from Sisyphus's hands as it gradually approached the apex. And from then on, things were different. The park's fortunes seemed to reverse overnight. The massive IP investment that was poured into Thomasland evaporated almost immediately, as Six Flags could no longer afford to pay off Ringo Starr and keep the rights to Thomas the Tank Engine. So in the middle of its opening year, the vibrant Thomasland transformed into the faceless Whistle Stop Park. Other IPs were unceremoniously ripped out from the park too, including the Wiggles. Beyond brands, 2011 also saw the loss of the bizarre but awesome Skull Mountain log flume. At the very least, its replacement would finally be a new roller coaster. Okay, well, new maybe isn't the right word. Like the Wild One, Six Flags America's newest attraction, its first coaster in over a decade, would be a relocation. The tenor of this edition was very different though. This was no triumphant reincarnation of a beloved ride, rescued from the brink of death as a historic park breathed its last. The newest edition was a reject from Six Flags Greater America, a flagship of the chain that had outgrown its woefully outdated B&M stand-up. Yes, please welcome Apocalypse, the original B&M. With its installation, Six Flags America would once again find itself with a piece of coaster history, but no amount of industry significance could redeem Apocalypse's outdated and unrefined layout and its horrendous stand-up trains that had fallen out of favor at the end of the previous millennium. Apocalypse was an embarrassing hand-me-down, an old, unfashionable t-shirt of a roller coaster that no self-respecting park would be caught dead wearing. Things, indeed, were different. 3 more years passed before the next major investment as the once groundbreaking SFA coaster lineup continued to age out of relevance. In 2014, the Six Flags chain once again dipped its hands into the irony bucket and tossed over another hand-me-down from the chain's Greater America. This time, the park received a generic Recession spinner, which served as the centerpiece for the new and impossibly small Mardi Gras area. Ragin' Cajun had been seen at countless parks countless times before, a compact clone, a far cry from the massive skyscrapers of the prior decade that were only clones in the loosest sense of the world. Things were different. Since Ragin' Cajun, the park has not received a single additional coaster, over a decade of complete stagnation. And then, the rot really began to set in. With each passing year, the park's once innovative coaster lineup grew more and more dated, and the years really did a number on rides like Roar, Joker's Jinx, and Batwing. The only upgrade made to the coaster lineup before 2024 was a retheme of Apocalypse to Firebird, and the replacement of the derided stand-up train with a single floorless train. This new train did little to cover for Firebird's innate flaws though, and the coaster still felt woefully outdated. At least they tried something, even if it was the bare minimum. The rest of the park would also fall victim to this slow and steady decline throughout the 2010s. Flat rides like the Zydeco Zinger, the Huss Breakdance Rodeo, and the less than a decade-old Larson Loop Bourbon Street Fireball bit the dust. The entire Whistle Stop Park Kids area came to an end in the closing months of 2022, and instead of ferrying away the shuttered attractions, the whole area was just left abandoned in place. You could easily see it for yourself if you decided to brave the train ride. The train would take you right past the once celebrated expansion, where you could witness the cute little kiddie rides succumbing to the elements. This is the Six Flags America that made its home in people's minds. A picture of decay. Many Six Flags parks in the 2010s and 2020s had grown stagnant, but this was something worse. Slowly and steadily, Six Flags America was withering away. But the park did not go gentle into that good night. In the mid-2020s, Six Flags America began to reverse course. 2021 kicked off a bit of a renaissance with the addition of Harley Quinn's Spinsanity as Amperla Giant Discovery. Nothing groundbreaking, but a solid step up from the lower-end flat rides that the park had been saddled with previously. 2023 spruced up the water park with the addition of Rip Curl Blaster, a state-of-the-art water coaster, was a pretty significant investment in the faltering Hurricane Harbor. Okay, well, it was supposed to open in 2023, and they got delayed to 2024, but it's the thought that counts. The much maligned Roar even got like a few inches of retracking, which turned it from intolerably rough to just brutal. Yay! But the real seismic shift began at the end of 2023, when the entire Coyote Creek area was fully shut down for a head-to-toe refurbishment. The formerly generic but charming Wild West area was transformed into Steam Town, overhauled with a lovely steampunk theme that felt fun and unique. Buildings were repainted, facades were changed, the whole walkway was redone. It really did feel like a genuine step up from the usual level of theming you would expect from a Six Flags park. The real headliners, of course, were the new additions. A new stunt show that was unbearably corny in the best possible way, a fancy new Zamperla nebula called Steam Whirler that seemed tailor-made for the cyberpunk aesthetic, and a full refresh of the park's lambasted SLC, which was renamed Professor Screamore's Skywinder. Unlike the Firebird retheme though, it felt like the park actually put some effort into Professor Screamore's transformation with a smart new color scheme, cute theming touches, and not one but two vest trains from Vekoma. Sure, it was another case of putting lipstick on a pig. This is one of the worst tracking SLCs out there after all, but the pig certainly looked a whole lot prettier than Firebird ever did. And as the anchor attraction for this quirky but fun little land, it certainly made a great impression. You walked through an ocean of hot black tar to arrive at Steamtown, and you felt that for the first time in years, there was genuine effort being put into the park. I wouldn't say the theming was Disney level or even like Busch Gardens level, but it was distinctive. It was inviting. It was charming. It felt like the people who did the refurbishment cared. And for the first time in over 10 years, the future of Six Flags America looked bright. Then came the Superman trains. Rumors had been swirling around in the wake of the merger that the park was on the chopping block, but I can't think of anything that placated those early 2025 rumors more effectively than the purchase of two brand new replacement trains for the park's quarter-century-old Intamin Hyper. Superman Ride of Steel opened up in 2000 with glorious T-bars, but in the wake of two fatal accidents on the other two Superman coasters, the original T-bar was defiled with slapdash retrofits. Two exposed metal bars, which spanned the length of the restraint, were added on each side, connecting to the bottom of the T through a hastily manufactured shin bar with foam pads that awkwardly forced your legs into the edges of an already cramped train. This retrofit was both crude and uncomfortable, not a good look for the park's supposed headlining attraction. Now, Six Flags America seemed to agree because two brand spanking new trains arrived for Superman at the beginning of the 2025 season. The new trains maintained their glorious T-bar purity, replaced those nasty retrofit parts with subtle padded shin guards that jutted out much more cleanly from the central bar. Now, the continued existence of the shin guards was a decent annoyance, and the trains did remain claustrophobic. These upgraded restraints were a pretty damn solid improvement over the previous trains, at least aesthetically. Honestly, the ride experience wasn't very significantly affected. What mattered more than the purchase itself was the statement that it made. Six Flags America was no longer content to cobble together. From here on out, the park would receive actual attention, and it seemed that the chain was ready to invest in SFA's future. Then, suddenly, the party was over. You know what happened next. On May 1st, 2025, the Six Flags Entertainment Corporation sent out a press release, announcing that Six Flags America would be finished at the conclusion of the operating season. November 2nd, 2025 would be the final day the park ever opened its doors. After 50 tumultuous years, the story of Six Flags America was finally coming to an end. Now, the rumor mill had been flinging out takes about Six Flags America's death for years, but the initial enthusiast response was one of surprise, and this sudden and extremely low-key announcement stood in complete juxtaposition to the surprisingly robust investments the park had begun to receive. It was like the chain dumped millions of dollars into the new Superman trains before going, "Oh shit, I didn't mean to do that," and hastily reversing course. But my theory was that these investments were already set in stone before the merger went through. And once Six Flags and Cedar Fair came together, the plans for a hopeful future were quickly thrown out the window. And while the 2024 and 25 investments were significant, so much more money was needed to combat decades of neglect. Flat rides such as Riddle Me This were just sitting on the midway collecting dust. Batwing was slowly self-destructing in the back of the park, growing more and more problematic by the day. Roar was in desperate need of a retrack far more significant than the penny-pinching pittance it received in 2025. And then there was Whistle Stop Park, an entire section of the park that was slowly returning to the earth. A full turnaround would take time and money. Money that the cash-strapped post-merger Six Flags Corporation did not want to invest, especially since the park's main competitor was now under the same corporate umbrella. And given SFA's continued unpopularity and lack of profitability, putting Six Flags America out of its misery was an easy, if cold, financial decision. This sentiment is painfully underscored by an absolutely brutal statement from the corporation's press release. The closure of Six Flags America and Hurricane Harbor is not expected to have a material impact on the company's financial results in 2025. Jesus Christ. Since the killing blow was dealt, Six Flags America has been left to slowly bleed out. Any sort of investment the park was receiving totally dried up, leading to a strapped maintenance budget and severe staffing shortages. Neglected maintenance across the park led to much more frequent breakdowns. The lift motor on Batwing broke, and then after a quick repair with what I assume was the motor from Nighthawk, the cover on the Zero car completely fell off in the middle of the ride. The last Flying Dutchman would never open again. Multiple coasters like Superman and Wild One suffered weeks or months-long closures for almost no stated reason, and the park's planned Fright Fest was completely cancelled, guaranteeing that SFA's final moments on its Earth would be nothing more than a sad limp to the finish line. It is a horrible way to go. But yes, the closure is completely justified. Let's look at the financials again, and it is painfully, I'm sorry, I can't do this, I can't. I love this place too much. I've been motivated to so thoroughly document the history and experience of this park for one reason. I adore Six Flags America, and though I abhor the choices of the Six Flags Corporation with every fiber of my being, I know I can't influence the whims of a multi-million-dollar company and save my beloved park, so I will not bother to even attempt that. What I will try to do is contend to the coaster community that the loss of Six Flags America is something worth mourning. And to support this claim, I have come up with 4 different major points. Some may call them specific aims. But before I get into them, there's one incredibly important point to make up top. Six Flags America has suffered precipitously in the months following the closing announcement, so I want to clarify that my judgment here will be based on the condition of the park before the closure was announced. Things have gotten bad, but I will not blame the recent trouble that SFA has had on the park itself. It's obvious that corporate has left this park hanging out to dry, and the workers are doing their best to keep it all together despite being almost totally abandoned. So let's just keep that in mind, okay? With that said, number 1. Contrary to what the neckbeards on online forums have sometimes proclaimed, Six Flags America was not a barren desert for thrill seekers. Sure, it had been a quarter century since the park received a ground-up addition, but that oversight has left DC's Six Flags with a collection of surprising historical significance, headlined by 4 legitimately great coasters that are all brimming with personality. We'll start things off at the very edge of the park with Zimmy's first victim, the last of the Vekoma Flying Dutchman, Batwing. And don't let the Nighthawk haters convince you that this ride was not worth some fond remembrance. It was forceful, disorienting, and utterly unique, delivering an unrefined intensity that made it way more thrilling than B&M Flyers double the size. Sure, it had the hourly capacity of a SEPTA train with half the cars closed off in the middle of rush hour. Yes, I do have an axe to grind here. And it was the one ride that regularly pulled an hour-plus long line. That is, if you were even lucky enough to be there on a day when it actually opened, but Batwing was worth the wait. It was the last bastion of its ride model, pre-bankruptcy Vekoma's bold leap into the future that paved the way for the Flyers of today. It, as much as Wild One, is a true piece of roller coaster history, and it will be sorely missed. In line with most of Six Flags America's attractions, Batwing felt a little rough around the edges when compared to a B&M Flyer, and this was not a bad thing. In fact, Batwing felt a bit dangerous, and that sense of danger produced a frightening sensation that no B&M could ever replicate. The feeding of fear started as soon as riders entered the station, watching those bulky laydown trains slowly submerge below the vertical. On ride, it was undeniably imposing, feeling the ride drop you down into the supine position. Heading out of the station face up was extremely disorienting, and you didn't really know where you were even going until the train loudly engaged the lift and angled you upward to be slowly cooked by the sun. I'm quite glad that I never got stuck here, especially since I was there and rode it the day that the lift motor broke. Whew. For the inexperienced, there was no way to tell when the peak was coming, so the anticipation continued to build and build in your gut as you rose further and further from terra firma. The release only came when the train crested over the pre-drop and briefly hung in suspension before momentum managed to catch up with the ride. Those in the front experienced what I term the X2 sensation, where the blood rushes into your head for multiple long seconds of dangle. It's a wacky sensation, but a lot of fun. Then the train finally dropped off the lift before flicking around to the flying position and immediately throwing his chips down on the table. A somewhat gentle first drop provided the brief euphoric sensation of flight before the overbank violently whipped the train through, punting everyone to the ragged edge of those suddenly minimalistic restraints. You moved around in the seat and it felt like you were going to fall out. It was so fun. The half revolution back into the lay-down position afterwards quite literally flipped the whole world upside down and sent the train hurtling towards Batwing's undisputed highlight, that loop, one of the most unique and wild elements in any roller coaster. Outside of B&M's bizarrely precise rip-off Flying Dutchman and Starry Sky Ripper, you will not find a flyer loop like this anywhere else. It started off with intense positives on the ascent, a precursor to B&M's famous pretzel loop, but at the crest of the element, time seemed to slow down. The forces backed off, replaced by dangle. Staring down at the ground, it felt like you were going to fall out. And you basically did, as the floaty respite concluded and riders were reacquainted with the positives as you flipped back down to Earth. The brief moment of peace amidst the chaos and G-forces always made the elements stand out in my mind. It was amazing. Batwing concluded this sequence with another disorienting flip and then a relatively lengthy dead spot that merely ferried the train into the two final inversions. Thankfully, those back-to-back inline twists were nuts. With violent revolutions, Batwing tried to toss you out of the restraint and splat you on the pavement. And after the inline twists, any fleeting pretense of relief from the forceful assault was quickly quashed by a pummeling helix that would suck the eyeballs out of your sockets. By the time the train flipped over one last time into the laydown position and cruised into the final brakes, everyone on the train needed a good few seconds to catch their breath. What a rush. Batwing was something special, and it will be sorely, sorely missed. I honestly cried a little bit when its closure was announced in September. This ride meant a lot to me. With its loss, the inimitable experience of the Vekoma Flying Dutchman will be something that future generations will never get to experience, and that's a damn shame. Rest in peace, legend. I miss you. Walking back from the long, empty path that once led to Batwing, we reached Superman Ride of Steel, one of the most bizarre yet entertaining hypercoasters around. Entire corners of the internet have been nourished by memes about the straight track, but if you get past the ridiculousness of the layout, I will contend that it is a pretty solid ride. I mean, come on now, it's an Intamin from the early 2000s, of course it launched you into the sky. That said, its layout and the layout of its mirrored twin up at Six Flags Darien Lake doesn't hold up to more modern installations. Hell, it doesn't hold a candle to the other Superman Hyper that opened up at Six Flags New England the exact same year. And some of the choices Intamin made here are just bizarre. Like, why does the first drop hit a ramp so quickly? Why are the helixes so drawn out? Why are the hills profiled so weirdly? Why the straight track? But the weirdness of this coaster gave it character. Unique and charming with a few truly diabolical moments of ejector airtime, Superman still left a powerful impression 25 years later. Now let me just say before I get into this ride overview, this next section applies to the Ride of Steel at Darien Lake as well, in case you're curious. I slightly preferred the Darien Lake version because it runs a teensy bit faster, has a better setting, and lacks the shin guards, but the sensations are largely the same. Hence the present tense. Six Flags America's headlining attraction starts off with a rather swift chain-driven ascent up to the ride's 197-foot peak. And then, if you had the correct idea to sit in the back of the train, the 205-foot tall first drop would throw you out of your seat with powerful building ejector airtime. Until it doesn't. This little slice of tangent radius adjacent track work feels very different than a B&M hyperdrop. It hits the max angle of descent rather quickly and then enters a straight ramp till the drop reaches its rather crushing pullout. I would call it a spiritual cousin to the famous second drop on Phantom's Revenge. Seat tossing until you hit the ramp, and then the abruptness of the transition kinda slams you back into your seat. And don't get me wrong though, it still gives a very solid yank, even if the party's over before it needs to be. After dispatching the strong pullout and banking to the right, hugging the ground inches from the grass, Superman flies through its course. A low and punchy right-hander leads to a camelback, which is a bit too tall for its own good, but still you get some okay airtime going up and down, depending on your position in the train. The airtime also ends a little earlier than you would think, which is a weird trend I've noticed with these Superman rides. IDKY, I'm digressing. A short hop after the pullout leads into the first of Superman's infamously drawn-out helixes, which look absolutely ridiculous off-ride, but are... okay, they're pretty ridiculous on-ride too. It offers a present, though weak, combination of positive G's and laterals. The sense of speed is at least very solid throughout. That and the comedy. Combine the hilarity of the helix with the straight track that immediately follows, and like, what the hell were they thinking? This baffling sequence is absurd enough to get me rolling every time, and that does count for something in my book. The straight track as a whole is a whole lot of nothing outside of the front row, but then, out of nowhere, the deceptively compact third hill absolutely chucks the whole train into space. When the ride is warmed up, Superman dishes out a truly violent burst of ejector that concludes with a shockingly tight pullout that literally punches you back into your seat. It is easily the best moment on the ride. And then the train enters another drawn-out helix, this one thankfully a bit less ridiculous than the first. A good joke never hits as hard the second time, but at least this one doesn't overstay its welcome. The finishing run is very strong though. 3 compact hills deliver the ejector, starting with a wicked S-hill that leads into a positively rapid double camelback finale. Vintage intimate intensity. Now, midway through the second hill, those in the back will be jerked forward by a rather annoyingly placed trim that hits mid-air time, and it's pretty uncomfortable, but if you know what's coming and brace for it, it is another good laugh. The last hill delivers one more feast of ejector before the train hurtles into the frighteningly short final brakes, coming to a stop with prodigious power but surprising smoothness. It is a wild finale and a fittingly bizarre end to one of the world's weirdest hypers. Though the layout is incredibly inconsistent and its twin brother up in Agawam beats the shit out of it and shoves into a locker, some moments on SFA's Superman do border on elite. Mainly the first drop, the third hill, and the final blitz of bunny hills. And the quirks of the layout do benefit Superman in one manner. They give the ride a lot of personality. Modern coasters aren't like this anymore, and Superman's baffling idiosyncrasies make it far more memorable than a more well-designed but faceless modern ride. At least we'll have Darien Lake's Superman to satisfy our appetites for the weird for the time being. Well, I guess we'll see about that one. What do you think? Is Darien Lake going? 'Cause I'd put $20 on it. Walking back from Superman, we next reach the lime green tangled headphone cord known as Joker's Jinx. Again, we have ourselves a clone, but though there is certainly more premier spaghetti-ols than there are like Vekoma Flying Dutchmen, Joker's Jinx is part of a dying breed. And that is a shame, because it's a great ride, an unabashedly old-school launch coaster. And don't let your Flight of Fear experiences color your perception here, this ride is a solid step up. The recipe is simple. LAM launch out of the station, weave through an absolute tangle of a layout, and hit the brakes. Though it doesn't have the flash or pizzazz of newer LSM swing launch coasters, I almost prefer this original presentation. The launch out of the station is an absolute event. There's no better way to build anticipation than by watching the train in front of you get yeeted into a dark and distant corridor. And hopefully you have a ride-op who has fun with it too, because that absolutely elevates the experience. I found the Six Flags America ops to be exemplary in this regard. They reveled in weaving torturous tirades, watching scared riders writhe around in anticipation until the moment of truth. And that moment of truth? Pretty solid. These early premiere LIMs have a deceptively strong initial kick that thrusts you into the back of your seat. Now the acceleration does die down as you continue through the tunnel, but I think I favor this style of launch compared to the slow build of a modern LSM. Then the train exits the confines of the launch tunnel and loops into the familiar spaghetti bowl layout. Those of you who have only experienced this layout from Flight of Fear might not have the highest opinions of this design, but there are 3 factors that make Joker's Jinx and the other outdoor clones an improvement over the original twins. Firstly, the ride launches faster, meaning the launch kick is stronger and the train travels more quickly through its course. Secondly, the outdoor light allows you to witness the numerous insane head choppers that litter the tangled layout. Thirdly, and most importantly, there's no mid-course to slow you down, which makes the second half way better. The initial Cobra roll offers decent force and whip, leading immediately into a sidewinder that cements this orientation. And from there, things get a bit weird as the train awkwardly meanders through some slow, high turns. It's not fun or forceful, but you do get some good moments to appreciate the solid view of the back of the park. Thank God, though, things pick up as the train sails through the rings of its non-existent midcourse. From here on out, you're only heading down, and the train gradually gathers momentum, going faster and faster, and then the track drops down to terra firma for a wicked snap that is a guaranteed oh shit moment for the entire train. You're absolutely flying at this point as the train bobs and weaves through the mess of supports, hauling ass and hugging the ground before charging through a disorienting corkscrew and popping into the final brakes. JJ's second half was a tour de force, emphasis on the force, and it was smooth to boot. Every time I got off this aging premiere, I was pleasantly surprised. Sometimes the old hits were hits for a reason. And speaking of some golden oldies, we now move to the park's historical centerpiece. Last but not least, it's the Wild One, all the way from 1917. And anytime you get a Woody that has comfortably eclipsed the average human life expectancy, you would not be unreasonable for couching your expectations. Sure, you can get a Cyclone, but you can also get a Comet at Hershey Park. I'm happy to say that Wild One fell into the former category, comfortably. Sometimes the forces could be a bit on the weaker side, but if you got it on a good day, which was most of the time, Wild One delivered shockingly strong, consistent airtime, along with a delightful, bouncy chaos that only an old-school Woody can provide. From the moment you reached the station and feasted your eyes on the proud 100th anniversary sign, this coaster elder felt special, old school in the best possible way. The ride experience began with a turn out of the station and a bouncy lift hill that kissed the 100-foot mark, leading into a surprisingly robust Cyclone-esque first drop that lingered at a shallow angle for a decent length of time before banking right and pulling the floor out from under you. In the back car, it was awesome and violent. From there on out, Wild One was a pretty standard out-and-back Woody, with a high turnaround and a compact layout. But the layout did have some awesome moments. Special shout out to the bouncy first camelback, the sneaky second half of the double down, and the following speed hill that plussed the airtime with a wicked and unexpected lateral kink. The return run beyond this point was delightfully janky and bouncy, ensuring that you left your seat even when a good bit of the ride's speed had bled off. The Wild One then finally leveled off and turned left in preparation for its Helix finale. And Wild One's Helix was debatably its signature moment and proudly greeted future riders from the station. There was an unfortunate trim break right before the Helix. I swear it didn't used to hit, but it did in its last years, and it did rob the final Helix of some of its potential power. The finale was still furious. There was no legend, but it pinned the whole train to the edge of the seat for multiple seconds before whipping into the brake run. It was also just rough enough to add to that out-of-control sensation without being uncomfortable. A satisfying conclusion to a delightful piece of coaster history. I'm glad Wild World made the effort to bring that concluding Helix back. As a historical artifact alone, the Wild One deserves to be saved. But don't let its advanced age overshadow the fact that Wild One remained a commendable attraction to the very end. It was certainly in contention for the best ride in the park, and I do not mean that at all as an insult. Let's hope that this ace landmark avoids its apparent fate and finds a home where it'll be given the respect and care it deserves. No, not you. An honorable mention, by the way, must be given to Ragin' Cajun, a bog-standard Recession spinner that for some reason spun like an absolute motherfucker. Once you hit that rotation toggle, the train spun like a Beyblade doused in hot 20W50. It was unhinged. Like, I don't know what they did to this ride, but I wish every Recession spinner could rotate like this. Also, the gators at the front of the cars were pretty cute. Be sure to continue the spin at Hurricanes. So that's 4 solid, unique, and characterful headlining coasters, bookended by a furious French spinner. But what about the rest of the coasters? Well, things fall off a cliff here pretty rapidly, but before you jump to the defense of the Demolition Man, I want to make my second point. Yes, Six Flags America's other coasters suck, but crucially, they were all really funny. The dregs of Six Flags America's lineup were bad in a robustly entertaining way. From the historical curiosity of Firebird and Roar to the gut-busting hilarity of one of the world's shakiest SLCs, SFA's bottom of the barrel always left a strong impression. And isn't that worth something in itself? I think so. Feel free to argue about it with me in the comments, because I'm sure there will be people who disagree. Now, two of the park's bottom dwellers were weirdly important in the story of the amusement industry, so why don't we start there? A Firebird's the first up on the docket, and yes, it's true, this was the very first B&M. And how did the world's premier coaster manufacturer do with their initial installation? Pretty bad. This baffling B&M heap always left me wondering how the vaunted company that made Batman the Ride and Kumba just a few years later could miss the mark so badly from the outset. And this thing used to be a stand-up. Ugh. The current titans of today's amusement industry would not exist if Firebird, aka Iron Wolf, never paved the way, so let's evaluate this curiosity for a bit. B&M started off in the 1980s as an offshoot of Giovanolo, and two designers who worked as subcontractors for Intamin, Walter Bullinger and Claude Mabillard, decided to strike it out on their own. And the two engineers boldly burst into the amusement scene with a slightly modified copy of their previous stand-up roller coaster. Their first coaster, in fact, was nearly identical to rides like the Intamin stand-up Shockwave that bounced around 5 different Six Flags parks before finally biting the dust in the parking lot of Darien Lake. Iron Wolf did plus the Intamin layout with a single additional inversion, sure, but in the context of its time and the marque's future accomplishments, Iron Wolf was weirdly conservative. Now, one could argue that its purchase, and thus B&M's eventual dominance, could be almost entirely attributed to the fervor of the stand-up fad that existed in the late 80s and early 90s. Walter and Claude were smart to grab a slice of Togo and Intamin's pie. I mean, fair, they designed the Intamin stand-ups to begin with, right down to the iconic box track. But their take on the model wasn't what you would call innovative. We should all be thankful that their ambition quickly grew and they found the cojones to irreparably change the course of history with Kumba. But while Kumba and other early B&Ms aged quite well, B&M's first attempt looks pathetic and outdated today. It doesn't help that the ride also kinda sucked. Have you ever wondered what it was like to ride a Vekoma Looper with B&M floorless trains? Well, look no further. Firebird combined the worst attributes of old-school pain and modern blandness. The two main factors contributed to my disdain: the track profiling and the layout itself. Firstly, the track work was pretty damn poor. I know you have an innate expectation when you walk up to a B&M and see the box track, but do not be fooled here. This was closer to Arrow than it was to Afterburn. Lack of heartlining was regularly apparent, and some of the transitions were horrendous. Especially that turnout of the corkscrew, which would give you a traumatic brain injury if you weren't prepared. The layout was super boring as well. A mid drop, one actually decent loop, a drawn out turnaround, one corkscrew, and a whole bunch of meandering. At least when like Goodery shakes you to death, you get a dynamic and forceful layout chock full of wacky inversions. But Firebird is that awful combination of boring and forceless that really sinks a ride into the bedrock of my rankings. Still, I will pull back from the beatdown because it's not the worst thing in the world. On a good day, it would almost approach the realm of mediocrity, and I definitely appreciate the floorless trains over the stand-up trains. And I still respected Firebird because it's a tremendously important coaster. It was ground zero for the modern world's preeminent coaster manufacturer, and if you rode it with that in mind, appreciating its very unique character and historical significance, it became a genuinely enjoyable ride. Minus the headbanging. Its paradoxical nature was entertaining. The box track was there, but the layout slammed into inversions like they were Planet Coaster pre-builts. The final section after the corkscrew was entirely pointless, but if you glanced at it from the right angle, you could almost see how Walter and Claude thought of their signature interlocking corkscrews. To analogize, Firebird was the please please me of roller coasters. It kinda sucked, but if you looked between the lines, you could witness the start of something incredible. I feel like I'm gonna anger a lot of people with that one. Firebird's next door neighbor is a similar story, Roar, the second ever GCI. Most of the time when I rode Roar, especially before this year's minimalist retracking, I chuckled and thought, how the hell did GCI survive this? How the hell did they survive Wildcat? These early GCIs sucked. But Roar had some okay moments, and just like its next door neighbor, you could strap into this absolute bucket of bolts and witness the DNA that would define GCI's design language over the coming decades. They would get a lot better as the years went on though, Jesus. If Firebird was B&M's Please Please Me, Roar was GCI's Hard Day's Night. There was a bit more there. Sure, the Woody was bereft of the snappiness and furious pacing that would become GCI's hallmark in later years, but layout similarities were readily apparent. That twisting first drop was decently solid in the back, and though the subsequent layout was largely populated with bland and overly elevated turnarounds, you would occasionally get decent airtime and the faintest whiff of laterals as the train flew up into the turns. Especially up front, I'd say that the front offered the most consistently solid roar experience. It also helped that the front was a tiny bit less susceptible to the bone-crushing roughness that would define the ride in its later years. Yeah, this thing was not maintained well. Roar had that grinding roughness that you could only find in a poorly maintained Woody, a dull and brutal jackhammering that really got into your bones after a while. But if there was one positive I could attribute to the neglected maintenance, the constant bouncing and jackhammering ensured that you would never get bored with the layout. Like Firebird, Roar could be bafflingly inconsistent. Sometimes it gave a decently pleasant and borderline forceful ride, and sometimes it offered absolutely nothing in the force department while violently shaking your teeth out. And Roar's moods seemed to be completely random. I've had middle row rides that have certainly contributed to future CTE, and I've had back row wheel seat rides that left me wanting more. It's bizarre. Decent ride. I'm gonna miss it. Finally, we get to a coaster that is very near and dear to my heart. The park's much maligned Vekoma SLC, Professor Screamore's Skywinder. And you can't help but just feel bad for Professor Screamore here. I mean, the poor fella just got his tenure track appointment, and now he has to pack his bags. Yet another victim of Trump's funding cuts, SMH. Life parallels aside, the real reason why I'm inextricably bonded to this pile of garbage is that it was the site of my first major coaster credit milestone. Yes, this craptastic ride was my 100th credit. Six Flags America was one of the first new parks I visited once I re-entered the hobby in the wake of COVID, and then, as now, I thought that celebrating such a significant milestone with a Vekoma SLC was the funniest option. I have, stuck to that conviction. Granted, this thing was way worse when I first rode it. Back in the day, Six Flags America was cursed with one of the roughest SLCs out there, packing the original torturous restraints between its embarrassingly faded rails. But in 2024, Six Flags America invested in an intensive refurbishment, turning the once neglected attraction from the depressing mind eraser into Professor Screamore's Skywindy SLC. A fresh coat of paint, some retracking, and most importantly, 2 brand spanking new trains with the delightful vest restraints. So did the new trains fix the ride? Wow, no. This coaster was still the worst tracking SLC I've ever experienced, and I've been on the one at Blackpool. The entire layout of Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium rattled like a bag of bones tossed in the back of a 30-year-old pickup truck. It shook side to side and it shook front to back. How the hell did it shake front to back? I don't get it. In earlier years, with the original restraints, a ride on this thing offered a one-way ticket on the pain train that came with a delicious meal of cauliflower ear. But with the vest trains, the constant brutal headbanging that sprung from the unwaveringly shaky layout was gone. Instead, you were left with the shake divorced from the pain, and it was incredibly funny. Non-stop shuffling from drop to breaks. It was so ridiculous and over the top that it elevated the ride into high comedy. One other thing about the horrendous tracking too, it keeps you on your toes. Modern coasters that are glass smooth grow predictable with repeated riding. The sensations are sensible, and so the forces are always exactly what you expect. In contrast, the Mad Professor was always cooking up something new. Since the shake was so constant and so random, you were never able to get used to it. Try to juke left at the apex of the Sidewinder and your legs would get yanked into the next postal code. Every time you hopped on the ride, there was something that would catch you off guard, and some may consider that a detriment, but it engendered in me a sort of perverse excitement for what fresh hell awaited me with each lap. Sure, the Great Nor'easter is a much better coaster, but Professor Screamore was far more entertaining. I'm also a bit of an SLC apologist because I genuinely believe that if you get past the horrendous track work, it's a pretty damn solid layout. Vekoma packed in some punchy positive G's and savage pacing, at least until the ride absolutely dies at the end. The rollover is cool and offers some crazy whip coming out of the element, especially in the back. The head choppers are pretty great throughout, and that double inline twist is positively diabolical. In concert with the shakiness that makes it impossible to truly prepare for, the inline twist might have been just the most intense element in the entire park. So with all that said, I will readily confess that Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium is a favorite of mine. It was a piece of shit, but it was my piece of shit, and this year I made concerted efforts to rapid-fire mini-marathons till the day it died. Lay your weary head to rest, Professor, and don't you cry no more. Speaking of mini-marathons, you get a pretty good bang for your buck from a visit to Six Flags America, and the reason was a simple one. Nobody went to the park. The park was both the victim and the beneficiary of a beautiful positive feedback loop that ravaged it in the post-bankruptcy years. SFA got shit on, attendance dropped, the park had less motivation to invest, attendance dropped more, etc., etc. And this death spiral was bad for the park, in fact probably a major contributor to its downfall. It was great for the guests. I visited Six Flags America on packed summer weekends, and even on those days where you'd be lucky to get on Nitro in less than an hour, it was a comparative ghost town. And it was great. You could easily take advantage of this paucity of people, despite what you may have heard from other thuzies who went to the park once and never came back. In my numerous visits over the past 5 years, the ops were on average pretty solid. Sure, the park occasionally suffered from a bout of one-train syndrome, a debilitating disease that can infect and riddle other similarly sized parks. But such an affliction was relatively rare. Wild One had 2 trains, so did Roar. Professor Screamore regularly ran both, even when the station was barren. Superman had 2 trains even before the recent purchase, and they would run one occasionally, but they quickly slotted in the second train if the line began to spill out of the station at all. Now that did leave a few shameful stragglers, but they were nothing crazy. Firebird wasn't worth your time anyway, Joker's Jinx still managed to run at a decent clip, and Batwing's woeful capacity had more to do with the failings of the ride model itself than the choices of Six Flags America, so I'll let Six Flags have that one. The operations themselves were somewhat relaxed. In their defense, they usually didn't need to rush around much, but they got the job done. All of the coasters, excluding Batwing, were pretty quick loaders. The park actually staffed their stations pretty well, so you didn't have to wait too long for one group of 2 to check the entirety of Superman's long-ass train. All these factors, combined with the naturally low crowds, made it easy to rack up double-digit ride counts in rapid succession. And maybe this is just me, but I'd rather ride 15 really good coasters in one day than 3 great ones, at least at a home park. With enough exposure, anyone can grow used to even the best coaster experiences, which is how I find myself peeking into Great Adventure and walking away from El Toro after witnessing a 20-minute posted wait. SFA certainly never had that problem, and let's not forget the multitude of shows and experiences that you could easily fit into your day because you had all the time in the world. If I were given the choice between a crowded day at Great Adventure and an empty day at Six Flags America, I would take SFA every time. You walked into the park and you felt like you owned the place, and that made me feel special. I can't take you away from me, this isn't fair! Now, to build off of my previous statement, we have to get into something a little more existential. And this last point is colored with a bit more subjectivity than my previous posts, and I know some of you may disagree strongly with my contention here. But if your opinions of the park were formed in the dying days of its last operating year, I promise you, things were different. Before it all fell apart, Six Flags America had this aura. I'm not saying it was automatically conducive to a good park day, but there was some sort of magic in the air. I've struggled to put this feeling into words, but basically you came into the park and it felt like it was something off. And not in like a bad way, but in a way that made things interesting. Like a cute shelter pup that was missing an eye, but loved you more than any purebred possibly could. I think it's mostly down to the wacky, uncanny valley feeling that Six Flags America doles out to its guests. SFA's weirdly endearing charm combined with the sensation of casualness and power that comes from an empty park day made for a delightful combination. I've long been of the opinion that flaws can contribute to the character of an experience, and Six Flags America was the archetype of that argument. Perfection can be boring. Bring me the straight track. Now, some would say that the ultimate goal of an amusement park is to provide a sense of escapism, to allow its visitors to leave the real world for a bit. But I think there can be such a thing as too much escapist immersion. Let's be honest, you've been to a Disney park or expensive equivalent, and after a long day slogging around in the heat, you walked away feeling a bit hollow. The theming is absurd, the rides are technological marvels, but as you schlep through hour-long queues in complete anonymity, drowning in a sea of faceless Disney adults, it feels like something is missing. To borrow a turn of phrase from Mean Girls, the experience is plastic. And though Six Flags America's disparate lands were a poorly integrated mishmash of genres, and its theming budget would cover like a single hot dog stand in the back of Rafiki's Planet Watch, the park's attempts to convey its theming always felt genuine. I mean, where else would you walk off a coaster and see a sign promoting the New Orleans-themed bar located at the ride exit? There was an earnestness to this park and its rides that was very endearing, even if it failed to provide an immersive experience on the level of a Disney park, or even like a Busch Gardens park, or even like another Six Flags park. Lastly, and most importantly, this place was nuts. At Six Flags America, you would see things that no other park would even consider presenting. The horror show of a park train that displayed multiple abandoned lands and attractions for all to see, the garish station of the Joker's Jinx that felt like you just leapt out of a comic book, the entire existence of Firebird, the straight track on Superman, the comically drawn-out walk to the back of the park just to see if Batwing was open, the Mardi Gras section that consisted of 3 small buildings and had Wild One in it for some reason, that fake bridge to nowhere. What? Bizarre, yes, but every one of these idiosyncrasies was extraordinarily memorable. Not to mention that things could and would go wrong in the most bizarre yet entertaining ways, which would definitely keep you on your toes. The sheer unrestrained chaos of Six Flags America broke down the traditional theme park immersion and beckoned you into a fascinating, irrational world where logic and reason completely fell apart. One could even say that the park was absurd. The French philosopher Albert Camus, in his famous publication The Myth of Sisyphus, "Oh shit! I bet you didn't see that coming, did you?" framed the ancient Greek legend in the context of the modern world and its incomprehensible nature. Sisyphus carrying out his eternal punishment is patently absurd. He would never reach the top of the mountain, but he pushed the boulder anyway. Camus used this story as a springboard to discuss the absurd nature of our existence. Basically, attempts to continuously seek concrete meaning in life are pointless because attempting to understand what cannot be understood is a futile endeavor. And to reconcile this contradiction, there are a few roads you can travel down. You can make a leap of faith, as proposed by philosophers such as Kierkegaard, and trust God to bridge the gap between the knowable and the unknown. But that will eventually fall apart, according to Camus, which is why you can never put your trust in Zimmerman. You can try to reconcile the unknowable within the bounds of human reason and fail, which leads to the conclusion that the only rational choice in life is to end it. Or you can accept the absurdity of existence and despair of ever reconstructing the familiar, calm surface which would give us peace of heart. You could live in revolt, in defiance of mortality and its limits. You could recognize that the illusion of meaning inevitably breaks down and live your life anyway. As Camus famously stated, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Some believe that we human beings are drawn to amusement parks and theme parks because they offer a controlled facsimile of an ideal world. A world where the existential concerns of the human condition melt away through thrilling G-forces and immersive ride experiences. But at Six Flags America, the line between facsimile and reality quickly broke down. Six Flags America was thus a park of the absurd. And maybe that's why so many enthusiasts had such negative opinions of the place. Opinions that were rarely held by the local parkgoers. Attempts to view Six Flags America through the lens of a more traditional park, a park which successfully offers the escapism it intends to provide, would only lead to frustration and tension. The logical response for one attempting to comprehend the inherently incomprehensible nature of SFA would be a complete dismissal of the irrational experience that this weird-ass park offered. But those who were able to accept the absurdity of Six Flags America would find liberation and joy. A genuine joy that transcends the intended facsimile and becomes something far more powerful, far more real, far more human. That is the vibe. Happiness and the absurd are two sons of the same earth. They are inseparable. Such is the beauty of Six Flags America. I spent the past however many minutes philosophizing about a dying theme park and trying way too hard to justify why Six Flags America deserves a second chance. But despite my bloviating, the park is still going down. My words are powerless to affect change. What can we really do? Well, you all know the answer, nothing. The die has been cast. I cannot sit here and pretend that I don't understand why the decision has been made. I get it. That doesn't make the loss any less painful. Six Flags America wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but its closure is an indisputably historic moment in the amusement industry. A park of this size shuttering its doors is the biggest closure since the end of Geauga Lake and Astroworld. An entire world of coasters, flat rides, and shows has been wiped off the map. And with the park's destruction, the enthusiast world is losing a lineup that is deeply steeped in coaster history. An increasingly rare Premier Spaghetti Bowl, one of Intamin's earliest efforts at a thrill coaster, the second GCI, the original B&M, the last remaining Flying Dutchman, the oldest coaster in the entire Six Flags chain. 80% of this park could be an ace landmark, but history only matters if you respect it. These rides deserved better. Moving beyond the attractions themselves, let's be honest, the whole park was a historical artifact. The lack of investment over the past 2 decades turned Six Flags America into a living document of the recent past. The heady optimism of the late 90s and early 2000s that was all but buried in the wake of the financial crisis. A park full of attractions that feel outdated now but were once amusement innovations, generating a sort of retro futurism that long predated Steamtown. Sure, those years were not kind to those buckets of bolts, but 100,000 miles and a bunch of rust holes in the frame will not stop me from craning my head at the car show if something's cool. I mean, the car people just call it patina. A good patina can tell a beautiful story. And finally, we must bid farewell to Six Flags America's absurd charm. Six Flags America was weird and utterly inimitable. There will never again be a park that feels like Six Flags America, and I know that I will desperately miss the aura that I could only feel in the confines of its walls. Some may say that getting stuck in the station of Batwing in the lay-down position for over 25 minutes is a horrible experience, but let's be real. It's a memory I will carry with me and laugh about for the rest of my life. And I value that. That's all sad and soppy, but I'm being pretty selfish. I want to zoom out a bit here. The tragedy of this closure does not lie in its impact on me, a cosmopolitan roller coaster enthusiast, but its impact on the millions of locals that made this place a second home. Those attendance numbers may have been low, but they were attendance numbers nonetheless. Throughout its tumultuous history, there were so many times where Wild World could have met its demise, but the park survived through the support of those that always stuck by it. Whole generations of families grew up going to Bowie. It was a place where those families made memories that last a lifetime, and where some of the enthusiasts of the next generation got their first taste of thrill. Like any regional park, Six Flags America's role in introducing so many first-time amusement park visitors to our little corner of this incredible world should be something to celebrate. Decades from now, when the park remains only in our hearts and minds, the hostile think pieces decrying poor reliability and minimal investment will slowly fade into the ether. Six Flags America will become DC's Astroworld, a lost experience for the next generation discussed in hushed tones, a great place made even greater through the beautifying distortion of nostalgia. Future generations will never walk through the front gate ready to face their fears for the first time. Will never engage in animated conversations in the bus on the way home from their school trip. Will never clock in for their first high school job and fall in love with roller coasters. However you may feel about the park, Six Flags America was an incredibly important place for so many. Hopefully, a few decades from now, when Travis Scott's second cousin releases his hit album about Six Flags America, we will all realize that such an experience for the people of Baltimore and DC will never be replaced. The door has closed, and it will never open again. But the memories will always remain. Rest in peace, Six Flags America. You will forever be missed.